Welcome to this week's Parsha Shiur, Parshas Pinchas. We are now back together again for those of us in Chutz La'aretz and those in Eretz Yisrael. We're all learning Parshas Pinchas this week, and I've got three ideas that I'm looking forward to share with you. The first is a very interesting Yalkut Shimoni. I was alerted to this in a sefer of collection of Rabbi Benjamin Yudin's Divrei Torah, and he refers to a Yalkut Shimoni which is on the first box on the page. If you're listening online, please go to the website torahtoday.org for the source sheet. The Medrash says, the Yalkut Shimoni in this week's Sedra, Parshas Pinchas, says the following: Vatzikravno. We deal with the Bnei Slavchad. Who are the Bnei Slavchad? Moshe Rabbeinu is getting ready, and we're now 40 years after Yetzias Mitzrayim. We're about to go into Eretz Yisrael, and the Bnei Slavchad come forward and they protest. They say that their father is no longer alive. They want a portion in Eretz Yisrael. And the Medrash praises them enormously. Vatikravno, they approach Moshe Rabbeinu. Says the Medrash, Hakol Adam Kasha, any auspicious person, She'omid b'teich dai rasha, who is standing in a wicked generation, Zacha lital schar kulon. There is a concept that not just being rewarded for the mitzvah itself, but the quality of the reward, if you like, or the quality of the mitzvah being performed, depends very much on the time in which it was performed. And what it means is, the Medrash means is, that a person who comes along and can take not only the schar for the mitzvah for their own performance, but if it's in the backdrop of a wicked generation, then the schar is going to be so much more, and he gets the schar, if you like, of the whole generation. And the Medrash gives some examples. Interesting. Noach oimed b'der hamabel. Noach, of course, lived in the generation of the flood. Zocha little schar kulon. Continues the Medrash. Avraham oimed b'der hafloga. Zocha little schar kulon. So to Avraham. Lot ba'anshei Sodom. Zocha little schar kulon. And then, fourth and finally, Elu oimdim b'der hamidbar. They, the Bnei Slavchad, came in the der of the Midbar. Zochu little schar kulon lamdecha, to teach us. But Moshe, which when exactly did the Bnei Slavchad come in front of Moshe? B'shah she'amar Yisrael nitna rosh, when the Jewish people said, "Let's go back to Mitzrayim." Amar Moshe v'halu Yisrael mevakshin lachzon Mitzrayim v'ateinu mevakshas nachal la'aretz. Everyone else wants to go back to Mitzrayim, and you're trying to protest and stake a claim in the land. At kan the Medrash. What exactly is going on over here? So the Medrash means the following, and I think it leaves some very important take-homes. The first example the Medrash gives is Noach. Noach remained a tzaddik, he remained righteous, at a time of vatimolei haaretz chomos, at a time of corruption, of theft, of violence. He went against the tide. He sort of swam against the tide of the feeling of his generation, and therefore, since he remained righteous, not only does he get schar for everything that he did, but noitel schar kulon, he'll get the reward of others in the generation. It's much more, it's a heightened reward. So to Avram Ha'ivri, the Lashon that we called him Avram Avinu is often referred to as Avram Ha'ivri. That's based on a pasuk in Lech Lecha, and he also went against the tide of his generation. The Medrash says, I've quoted it here, the second box, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol ha'olam kulam me'eva echad v'hu me'eva echad. That the whole world are on one side and Avram is on the other side, hence the title Avram Ha'ivri, Lashon of Ever, a side. Again, Avram Avinu went against the tide of the Der HaFloga. He went against the tide of a very godless society, introducing monotheism into the world, and therefore Avram Avinu, again, is another example the Yalkut brings as someone who swam against the tide. Interestingly, the third example that the Medrash brings is that of Lot. Lot practices chesed in a society which is anti-chesed. They legislate rules prohibiting chesed. And Lot, although he's criticized by Chazal in other areas, he practices chesed, and therefore the Medrash is complementary over here. Lot b'anshei Sodom zocha little schar kulam. He gets the schar of the society which was not practicing. And then the fourth and final example of the Medrash is Bnei Slavchad. People are looking to return to Mitzrayim, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Wow, you're going against the tide. You're wanting a portion in Eretz Yisrael." The important point that emerges from this Medrash is this: each mitzvah is judged not only in respect of how it is performed, but when it is fulfilled. And therefore, if you're fulfilling a mitzvah in a situation, in a backdrop, where the culture is sort of apathetic to that mitzvah, or even sort of negative to it, then the schar and the performance of that mitzvah is so much more impressive, and therefore the reward is even greater. And if you think of examples of it, imagine we're coming up to the holiday season soon. Shiva B'Tammuz is Thursday, and then 3 weeks, and then traditionally the holiday season is beyond that. Imagine you're living in your Jewish community, wherever that happens to be. Kashrus, for most of us, is not a concern. It's so easy with so many kosher shops. But a person therefore goes out and is careful and buys kosher things. The schar you get for that is I'm sure enormous, because you're keeping kosher, and that might be a challenge for many. But if you're in a holiday environment and you're away from your normal community and your normal shops and stores, and therefore you're more limited as to what you can buy, in some situations the schar is going to be manifold times more, because it's so much more difficult. Another example, for most of us nowadays, for keeping Shabbos and having a job it's not a temptation even. It's not a temptation to be Mechal Shabbos. Baruch Hashem, we're living in an environment, we don't have those pressures. So when we keep Shabbos, of course HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us rewards. But look at that Shabbos compared to the Shmir Shabbos of those who came from Europe to America, or from Eastern Europe to Western Europe in the early 20th century. Many times, if you didn't show up to your job on Saturday morning, you'd be out of a job. And therefore, on Friday afternoon, when the boss told you, if you don't come tomorrow, don't come back on Monday, that was a tremendous Mesiras Nefesh. And many Yidden did it. So, of course, I keep Shabbos, you keep Shabbos, and they kept Shabbos, but their Shmir Shabbos, the reward for that, is infinitely greater, because of not so much the how it's fulfilled, but when it was fulfilled. That's exactly the point. Sometimes it's the siman kashrus of the Jew is really highlighted in a situation when you're going against the tide, and not in a situation when you're just sort of going with it. Diana Abramsky, Zatzal, used to say the following. The Gemara says, and I've never really found this Gemara, I haven't really looked for it, but the Gemara says that if an animal has a fall, and you suspect that perhaps one of the limbs is broken, which could render the animal treif. But in the days, in times of Chazal, you didn't have X-rays and scanners checking, an MRI checking the bone or breakage of an animal. What would you do? How would you test? So the Gemara says that you would watch the animal walk as it's sort of in a sort of a shallow river, but when it's walking against the tide of the river, and if it's got the strength to walk against the tide upstream, as it were, then that is a sign that the animal is kosher and is not a treifa. Says Dan Abramsky, it's the siman kashrus for a Jew as well. If a Jew can swim against the tide, in a situation not when everything is easy, when it's going smoothly, when the kosher food is easy, when Shmir Shabbos is easy, but in a situation when you're going against the tide, that is the real siman kashrus of a Jew. And perhaps that's really what the Medrash is saying, that these four examples, Noach, Avraham, Lot, and the Bnei Slavchad, they're all doing something which is in contrast, in opposition, as it were, to the rest of their society. And therefore, they're judged not only in respect of how they do the mitzvah, but when and the backdrop of that particular mitzvah. Okay, that's the first item to share. The next item is, moving on, is when Moshe Rabbeinu is told that he's not going to go into Eretz Yisrael. And it's a tragic pasuk, it's a very sad pasuk. He's told that they're so close but yet so far. That Moshe Rabbeinu is told that after the death of Aaron and Miriam in last week's Sedra, Moshe Rabbeinu is still hopeful. And then he's told that he's not going to Eretz Yisrael. He's taken to a vantage point where he's going to see Eretz Yisrael, but he will not be allowed to enter. And his response is to choose a successor. And Rashi is very commended. Rashi and Chazal praise him for it. The pasuk says, "Vaydaber Moshe Hashem lema yifked Hashem lekei ruches l'chol balso ishal ha'eda." Choose a leader. Okay, I'm not going to go into Eretz Yisrael. Choose a leader. Asher yetze lifneim, v'asher yovel lifneim, asher yitziem, asher yiviem, v'lo yisiadas Hashem k'tzoin asher ein lohem roeh. The Klal Yisrael shouldn't be a nation without a leader. Says Rashi, lo dia shvochen shel tzadikim, to show the praise of tzadikim. K'sheniftarim min ha'olam manichim tzorchem v'oichim b'tzorchei tzibur. How amazing. He's just been told devastating news, and he puts aside his own personal loss and feeling, and he focuses on what's going to be with Klal Yisrael. So what's going to be with Klal Yisrael? Who's going to lead them? And he straight away says, Yifkod Hashem Elokei Ruches, etc. Fine. The next Parsha, that's at the end of Perek Chof Zayin. In Perek Chof Ches, the narrative continues, and the Parsha says the following: Vayidaber Moshe el Hashem leimer. Moshe, interesting, a very interesting pasuk. Normally, of course, it's Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe leimer. But listen to this: Vayidaber Moshe el Hashem leimer. Tzaves b'nei Yisrael v'amartu aleihem kavosim b'nei shonot tmimim shnayim layom oile somid es hakeves echot taseh v'aboy keves hakeves hasheni taseh ben arba'im. This is the famous Parsha of the Tomid shel Boiker and the Tomid shel Ben Ha'arba'im, the daily Tomid. Now, really the question is this: what is the connection between these two parshas? Between Moshe Rabbeinu asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to choose a leader and is told Yeshua is going to take over, and the next parsha where Moshe Rabbeinu is, as it were, addressing HaKadosh Baruch Hu and says, Vayidaber Moshe el Hashem leimer, and it says HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands us to bring the Shnei Tamidim, the two daily offerings. What exactly is the connection between Moshe Rabbeinu requesting a successor to lead Klal Yisrael and the Karban Tomid? That's the question. So, Rashi brings a medrash. Rashi says this: Saves b'nei Yisrael, ma'amu lemala. What does it say above? Yifkod Hashem, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, Ad she'atom etzaveni al bonai, before you start commanding me about my children, tzavei es bonai olai, command my children to honor me. And therefore, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, command my children to do something for me, and that is the Karban Tomid. Rashi therefore is saying that proper order and respect is needed, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu first commands Moshe, not Moshe asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Fine, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, bring the Karban Tomid. But the question is, why the Karban Tomid? If the point is just to get the order correct, and rather than Moshe Rabbeinu instructing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it should be HaKadosh Baruch Hu instructing Moshe Rabbeinu and Klal Yisrael, then it could be any mitzvah. It could be the mitzvah of Lulav, of Shabbos, of 1,000 things. Why is the Karban Tomid chosen of all mitzvahs to get the order correct, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu first commands Moshe? So perhaps the message is this, and I saw this in Rabbi Rosny, he quoted Rabbi Tzalel Yehuda Rudinsky with the following insight. The idea is this: a leader, like a king, has to be focused and totally committed to his people. He's never really free from responsibility. His job is 24/7. Klal Yisrael cannot be abandoned for a moment. That is what real leadership is. They say the Lubavitcher Rebbe, his Yahrzeit was recently, last week I think, that since when he became a Rebbe and he moved eventually to Crown Heights, he didn't take a holiday. He was so felt such a degree of responsibility that he never left. He was on duty, as it were, 24/7. That is how a leader should be. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Klal Yisrael to do something constant for him, i.e., the Shnei Tamidim, the Karban Tomid. If Klal Yisrael show they are constantly and consistently connected to me, then I, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will provide them with a leader who will care for them. And that's exactly the point. That's the connection. So Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, please HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we need a leader, please provide somebody. And then we have the next parsha. The next parsha is the Karban Tomid. And therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, that's pshat in what Chazal is saying, that's what Rashi brings. That Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ad shatam tzaveni al bonai, tzavei es bonai alai, command my children on me. And what he's saying really is specifically the Karban Tomid, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling Klal Yisrael to do something for him. But Klal Yisrael, if they show they're doing something constantly and consistently, and they want to be connected to me in that way, then I will provide for them a leader who will take care of them constantly and consistently. And that concept of consistent is critical. There's a medrash which we quoted before, famous medrash, which is brought in the Hakdama of the Ein Yaakov, which no one really knows where the medrash is, but it's certainly quoted the whole time, and its source, it seems to be what everyone refers to is the Hakdama of the Ein Yaakov. And the medrash says this, that they were debating, the Tanoim were debating, which is the most important pasuk in the Torah. Interesting debate. The medrash says, Ben Zoyma Omer, Matzinu pasuk Kol Yosef Hu Shema Yisrael. You know what the most important pasuk in the entire Torah is? Pasuk of Shema Yisrael. Ben Nana Soimer, no, Motzinu pasuk Kol Yoseh. For after the Recha Kamoicha, that's a more comprehensive pasuk. So if you were to do this at your Shabbos table, which is the most important pasuk in the whole Torah, I would imagine these two pasukim will get mentioned. Shema Yisrael, the classic statement, declaration of faith, underpinning the emunah of a Jew, often the last sentence to be said that leaves the Jew's mouth before he takes leave of this world. The pasuk of After L'Recha Kamoich is Klal Godel B'Torah. I can understand why they responded, this is the most important pasuk in the Torah. But then comes a curveball. Shimon ben Pazi Omer, Motzinu pasuk Kol Yoseh. I've got a pasuk which surpasses Shema Yisrael and After L'Recha Kamoich. What on earth can surpass those two? Says the Medrash, Motzinu pasuk Kol Yoseh es hakeves echod taseh baboiker. This pasuk from this week's Sedra. What on earth? Why is that more important than the other two? And then, to make matters more curious, Omid Reb Ploni al Raglov Omer halacha keben pazi. The halacha is like ben pazi, that indeed this hakeves echod taseh baboiker is the most important pasuk of the whole Torah. Why? How so? The answer is because it's highlighting the midah of consistency, and that is a critical midah in all aspects in life. That a person needs to be consistent in his avodas Hashem. That it's not the pot that's taken off the gas every couple of minutes will never boil. The tortoise wins the race. Consistency is key, and that's really what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling Klal Yisrael to do. Do something which is consistent for me, and therefore I will show, if you're consistent and constant in connection with me, I will provide you with a leader who's going to take care of you 24/7, because that's what a true leader is. It's consistent and constant. That's really the highlight point of this medrash and the idea in the Chazal as described. Okay, let's press on. One final idea. This is something which I came across, which is not really to do with Parshas Pinchas, but it's to do with Shivas B'Tammuz, which is approaching. And of course, it's always in this time of year. And I found this in the writings of the Aruch LaNer. The Aruch LaNer has a pirush on Chumash called Minchasoni, and at the end of Parshas Bolok, he writes something very beautiful, which I think has relevance to the times we're living in. So he quotes first of all a Mishnah in Tanis. Let's go through the Mishnah first. A well-known Mishnah. This is in box number 3, the first box after paragraph 3. The Mishnah says in Tanis, in Perek Daled Mishnah Vav, Chamisha Dvarim Eru Es Avoseinu. There were 5 tragic events that happened to our forefathers, B'Shivas B'Tammuz on the 17th of Tammuz, V'Chamisha B'Tisha B'Av, and 5 things that happened on Tisha B'Av. Here we go. B'Shivas B'Tammuz Nishtabru HaLuches. On the 17th of Tammuz, the luches were broken. That's with the mice of the Egel Azov, of course. Number 2, Ubatal HaTomid. The Tomid offering was discontinued when there was no sheep left to offer during the siege of Yerushalayim that preceded the Churban of Bayis Rishon. That's the Rambam in Hilchos Tanis says it's referring to Bayis Rishon. Third of all, the Huvka Ha'ir. The wall of the city of Yerushalayim was breached by the Roman army, and that was 3 weeks before Churban Bayis Sheni. In Bayis Rishon, the Gemara says in Tanis that actually the breach of the wall took place on the 9th of Tammuz. So this is referring to Bayis Sheni. The fourth thing is Saraf Apostomus es HaTorah. Apostomus was a Greek general who headed the Greek occupation of Eretz Yisrael during Bayis Sheni. He burned the Torah written by Ezra, and this Torah was the most authentic copy and was used to check texts of all other Sifrei Torah. And then, fifth and finally, Vehemid Selom Behechel. They placed an idol in the Heichel of the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, says the Aruch LaNer in Minchas Oni. Ve'im Omnon Amarnu, a very beautiful piece. Masha'onu Misanim B'Yudzayim Tammuz, who al Bekias Ha'er, was the breach of the wall Shabbai Sheni. You ask people, why do we fast on Shivas B'Tammuz? Most people will tell you, well, that's when the tragedies began. There was a breach of the wall of Yerushalayim, which ultimately led to the Churban 3 weeks later. The majority of them happened during the Second Temple period. That's what we've just mentioned now. He says that all five of them, apart from the Shviras Haluchas, of course, which happened at the time we came out of Mitzrayim, all happened in the Bayis Sheni. Okay, the Art Scroll Mishnayos bring the Rambam, who says that Bottle HaTomid was actually during Bayis Rishon. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, Avol. Next paragraph. Says Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, the Archnener, that although these things happened way back in history, they have application and relevance to us today. He's writing in the 19th century, but it's true then, it's true in the 21st century. All the tzaras that have happened in the generations subsequent to this Mishnah, of a prat hachamishim uras haroy she'eru lavasenu b'yudzayin b'tamuz, mamish nischadshu b'zman hazeh, they have reappeared, as it were, in our times, says the Aruch LaNer, kaseda shenimnu b'masnisin, in the order that they appear in the Mishnah. V'hoyu ba'achreinu levatal emunas Yisrael b'mirabim. The attempt is to destroy this lax of emunah in Klal Yisrael. Ki lo b'pam echod yardu mehar gevor lebar amuk. It wasn't an instantaneous transition from a high point to a low point. It was a slippery, slow decline. When Klal Yisrael were involved in Torah, it's learning Torah with focus and dedication which prevents us from stumbling over Averis. But, says Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, they were involved in other sort of aspects of life. They were getting distracted from learning Torah until we were forgetting to learn Torah and we were forgetting to keep Torah. And that really is an application of breaking of luchos, because we're not learning properly, therefore we're not keeping properly. That is the symbolism of the Shviras HaLuchos. Amr Chazal, Shviras HaLuchos bo shikchas HaTorah. But that just represents forgetting Torah. People were still trying to be strong, but they were lax in their consistency of their keeping of the mitzvahs. Sometimes they were keeping the mitzvahs, sometimes not. Sometimes Averas, they were very careful not to transgress them, and sometimes they were not very careful. Shlomo Melech gives a moshel in Koheles in the 9th parak. A person is in the city Musugeres Mikol Tzad, which is fortified and secure all around. Ish misken, and then a dangerous man comes in. And the Chochem, who is the Yetzer HaTov, is protecting it. And there's this sort of clash of the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer HaTov. And therefore, when we forget, we don't learn Torah with dedication, that leads to a laxity and we forget in many aspects of Torah. And then we forget the Bittul HaTomid, which represents the consistency and performance of the mitzvahs. Sometimes we keep, sometimes we don't keep, sometimes we violate Averis, sometimes we don't. Once that kicks in, then you've got the breach of the city. Because the city is no longer fortified, it's not secure anymore. That's what Shlomo Melech means, that the dangerous king is going to come and attack it because it's not secure anymore, there's a breach. Once you're inside, you can get rid of the Yetzer HaTov as protecting it, that was controlling and protecting it from inside, and then it's now under the grip of the Yetzer Hara. And that really leads to the burning of the Torah, which is what the Mishnah refers to. That those who come in, the traitors, they come and destroy the Torah and burn it. That they're hardly keeping anything anymore. Not only, it's bad enough they're destroying and burning the performance of every mitzvah, and there's almost nothing left. but they're actually celebrating it by bringing an idol into the Heichal. Until now, the Kedusha was residing there. It's akin to the time of the Ekel Azov, where Klal Yisrael, certain parts of Klal Yisrael were saying, Eile Lekech Yisrael. That's what was going on, says Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger. This slippery slope. That's how you want to appease him. Says Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, that's what I'm seeing in my generation. They're going from bad to worse, and the light and darkness are becoming mixed up. So he's saying an amazing thing, that each of the 5 things that happened on Shivas B'Tammuz, he applies it to his own generation. And therefore, you see that it starts off with the breaking of the luchos, which is a representation of shikchas HaTorah, of forgetting the Torah, and then you get the bottle hatomid, which is a reference to the lack of consistently keeping the mitzvahs, and sometimes yes, sometimes no, for hufka ha'ir, and then there's a breach, and the Yetzer Hara is coming in and is sort of taking control, and then the soras hapostomes HaTorah, which means burning any remnants of performance of mitzvahs, and then the celebration of that terrible ideology. There's a celebration of that fact, as it were. Omnom. There's one final paragraph which is a bit more comforting. We hope still that there will be a fulfillment of the prophecy of the prophet, but that which caused the 4th Tzom, i.e. Shivas B'Tammuz, it will transition to a period of happiness and of joy, by HaKadosh Baruch Hu returning, and for those who serve him, and the dispersal of Klal Yisrael will be gathered in again. So a very beautiful insight. Rabbi Baruch Lener applying the 5 tragedies that take place on Shivas B'Tammuz and applying them to his times and perhaps sadly to other times as well. So just to summarize the 3 ideas that we've spoken about, the first was the Yalkut Shimoni, a beautiful Yalkut that the Medrash praises the Bnei Slavchad, and it praises not only them but Noach, Avraham and Lot, that the idea is that each mitzvah is judged not only in respect of how it is fulfilled, but when it is fulfilled. And in all of these 4 instances, you have people who went against the tide, and therefore they get the schar of the entire generation. And that's really the point is that to be aware of the backdrop of certain mitzvahs which have become lax, and to be aware that performance of those, despite a backdrop which may be apathetic or worse to them, will give tremendous schar. And really it's the siman, like I said, that Dan Abramsky says, the siman kashrus of the Jew is how he behaves when he's sort of going against the tides, not in the normal situation. Then we mentioned this point, this beautiful idea of the Mishkan Betzalel, the Betzalel Yehuda Rudinsky, very beautiful idea of what is the connection between the narrative talking about Moshe Rabbeinu not being allowed to Eretz Yisrael and choosing a new leader, and then the Parsha of the Korban Tomid straight afterwards. And the Medrash Rashi brings, which is Adshet Mitzaveni Al Bona, Tzaveh Es Bona Olai. So Rashi gives the example, the Parsha gives the example of the Korban Tomid. But why this mitzvah? What's the idea? And the idea is, the Rida HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying that do something consistent for me, constant and consistent for me, and if Klal Yisrael show that they are constantly and consistently connected to me, I will provide them with a leader who will care for them 24/7. That's really the role of the leader, and that's the connection between these parashas. And then the final idea of Rabbi Baruch, the Aruch Lener, Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, of Shivas B'Tammuz, how the 5 things in the Mishnah in Tanis apply to beyond as a historical description of what took place at the time over the centuries, largely in Bai Sheni, but something which apply in more recent times, something to be aware of. And Mitzvah Hashem, like he concludes with, we should be zocher to this period of time being transformed into a time of sosan and simcha.